This is Mark Sobel, U.S. Chair OMFIF. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Vlad Rashkovan. Vlad, as he's known, has been Ukraine's representative in the IMF since 2017 in his capacity as executive director for one of the IMF's largest constituency groupings, comprising the Netherlands, Ukraine, Belgium, and many Eastern European and former Soviet Union countries. He served as deputy governor at the National Bank of Ukraine from 2014 to 2016 in the wake of the Maidan Revolution, where he led critical efforts to overhaul and cleanse the banking system. Ukraine faces a range of enormous financing needs. There are immediate and short-term financing needs to deal with the current situation. There are short to medium-term needs to grapple with the ongoing war and its persistence in the months ahead. And then there will be the longer-term post-war reconstruction needs. So today we are going to discuss support for Ukraine in these three various financing stages. So welcome, Vlad.
Thanks, Mark, for inviting. Happy to see you.
A pleasure. First, let's start off with Ukraine's immediate and short-term needs. I always underscore that wars have to be financed. The government has to pay for pensions, increase defense spending, and soldiers' wages, etc. If the government has to revert to large-scale monetary financing to do so, then high or hyperinflation can ensue. To avoid such an outcome, a country can undertake adjustment and financing measures at home and mobilize external support from bilateral donors, the international financial institutions, and even the private sector. And debt relief can play a role. Can you tell us a bit about how Ukraine is dealing with its immediate to short-term financing needs?
Yeah, Mark, I would say that any war is a very resource-intense enterprise, and unprovoked, unjustified and illegal invasion of Russia, of Ukraine, is not an exclusion from this rule. Though Ukraine clearly needs support, and this is not only financial needs, it's military resources, is a humanitarian aid, both in Ukraine and in Europe. It's logistical support, due to the Block C ports or during the situation when we had a petrol crisis in Ukraine. Sanctions against Russia also help, towards this war. And we also value the desirable EU accession as an anchor or a purpose or a dream. And this dream also feeds our forces. But yeah, so clearly, these stages, they can be divided for the immediate, short-term and long-term, financing. And speaking about the immediate, because this was your first question, we can probably look slightly backwards to the last, 7 months. And looking backwards, Ukraine managed to consolidate more than $17 billion of aid during these 7 months of the war. And from 10 to 13 billion are still expected by the year end, which should bring this year total support to around $30 billion. Is it a big amount? I believe so. This is a historical high for Ukraine. Ukraine never received such an amount in a short period of time, but we are going through also historical times. And the invasion, as we discussed, the invasion of another state is not enough to support Ukraine. Unfortunately, no. Funds were neither sufficient nor speedy. During the IMF and World Bank spring meetings, the IMF managing director, Kristalina Georgieva, she publicly said that Ukraine requires around like $5 billion per month. And so during the IMF World Bank spring meeting, the IMF managing director, Kristalina Georgieva, publicly said that Ukraine requires around like $5 billion of support per month, which means around $50 billion per year for 10 months. And we never received $5 billion per month. In March, we received 3.3, in April, 1.7, May, 1.5, July, 1.7, only 2 months. We received, close to $4.5 billion, which was June and August. And as a result, the National Bank had to spend their reserves. Totally, they sold to the market around $20 billion and managed to buy out only around 3.2. So only with the help of international partners, and which the governments sold back to the national bank, to the reserves. This helped to replenish the foreign reserves of the country. And to avoid this in future, these needs of the selling reserves, we are working with government. We have a small team with the Prime Minister, Minister of Finance, a few people. I'm a member of this team, and we're working actually daily, to secure some funding for September, for October, for November, December. Therefore, by year end, really looking money abroad, locally, and now we're waiting for EU macro-financial assistance, which to come, which is still 5 billion euro. They already have an agreement on that. 3 billion euro grants. They're still working on solution. US provided a massive the funding support to Ukraine for grants, and this is up to now I think is around $8 billion. IMF was one of the first which provided money to Ukraine, $1.4 billion, like weeks after the war started. Hopefully we'll be able to disburse another emergency financing soon in the next weeks. All of these create some confidence both in Ukraine and with a partner. And if Congress will support, there will be more money from US in the next months. UK is planning to give some guarantees for World Bank. Hopefully France will help. But in a nutshell, just answering for immediate needs, I think the government, the national bank, together with international partners, they managed to go through these, the first macro shock brought by the Russian invasion. So we managed it. Despite of that, the reserves decreased. As of now, about like a $7 billion net. The inflation is 25%, devaluation is 25%, and also debt is increasing because unfortunately, the most of the part of the money, except money from US and the 1 billion euro grant from Germany, is coming with loans. And while all the reports say that the financing aid should come in grants, and giving loans creates a problem for the future. But anyway, so far, the speed was important. The financing was given, and we are coping with these outcomes of the invasion.
Well, thank you for that. Of course, inflation is up, as you said, and the hryvnia was devalued. And of course, the first tranche of IMF rapid support basically will cover your country's reflows to the IMF. But let's turn to the short to the medium term. How do you define this period? What are your priorities?
Yeah, I would split these like a short to medium period, like maybe to three parts. The first is to go through winter, because Russia is clearly blackmailing Europe with cold winter, but they do everything possible to make winter cold also in Ukraine and attacking our critical infrastructure in major cities. And therefore, we need to secure gas supplies. It requires both money, but also physical supply of gas. And government works now with some partners, EBRD, development banks, to do that. And this is the first part of the short-term needs. The second topic is still a continuation of the budgetary support of Ukraine for next year. If this year it was like a $5 billion per month budgetary needs, for next year deficit is around $3.5 billion per month, and the decrease of financing needs is coming from different factors. Is clearly the restoration of economic activity on the liberated territories, some return to business of many companies in the regions which were not very much affected, return of millions of people to Ukraine, which is both labor force, but also the consumption, the consumers, and plus also government does some revenue mobilization locally, increasing taxes in order to finance the deficit. Probably there will be some still some monetization of the national bank, but the bulk of money still to come from donors and international financial organizations. And I hope that some part of this money next year will come also from the bigger program of IMF. and money from G7. I think this is the major source of money, G7 plus, and I do hope that this money will come in the form of grants and not loans, especially because there is also the third, let's say, short to medium term needs, is something which we name fast recovery. Because you still need not only to support, as you said, salaries, pensions, and government functions, and internally displaced people, you need to rebuild something which Russia destroyed in the country, at least to do some immediate rapid things, starting from schools, roads, bridges, some agricultural changes. And you know that last week the World Bank published their rapid financial needs assessments for damage assessments for Ukraine, and according to their calculations, the immediate needs of Ukraine is $105 billion. I mean, you cannot finance these with loans. You really, because this money doesn't exist in the world, we need still to work on this. And the government already composed some projects for around like a $15-17 billion. This is what they know, what is more or less in the pipeline of the immediate job. It's not yet financed. The government is working with international partners to ensure this financing. But in general, I believe that Ukraine will be the most important test for the international community's ability to coordinate aid efficiently since the tsunami in Indonesia or a quake in Haiti. And, probably the poorly coordinated response and potential lack of global leadership are even bigger challenges for Ukraine now than an inadequate amount of funding. So these three issues for us are important, as I said, in the next 6 to 12 months. Go through winter, support the budgetary needs again, and to find money for the financing the rapid or fast recovery, and hopefully it will be done with donor coordination.
Well, we're going to turn to the longer term, as it were, but for this period, do you have any thoughts for us on coordination, and also more specifically the role of the IMF, the institution in which you serve?
Yeah, I strongly believe that coordination is needed. That military support in Ukraine is provided through so-named Ramstein concept, where the ministers of defense meet regularly, periodically, meet on the military base and working on analyzing the situation and also agreeing on the military support to Ukraine. This very much helps. This plays a huge role in the war on the fields, but also, as I said, in the confidence of Ukrainian people, morale, etc. And we need something like that. We need to have an economic Ramstein for Ukraine. Therefore, we need to have, ministers of finance or even leaders of state, who could meet regularly with tasks, not Ukraine as one of 15 different tasks, but really with a focus how to support Ukraine. I believe this coordination should be on the level of G7, maybe G7 plus, meaning that those countries who want to join, there is clearly a support of, like Netherlands, for example, adding, Australia is helping a lot to Ukraine now. There are a few other countries which do as well. And we need to have these like economic Ramstein team for Ukraine periodically. I hope that in the next weeks and months, this idea will be materialized. Either it will be discussed during the annual meetings here, and IMF can play a role in this, or it can be organized during the Berlin conference, therefore under the G7 leadership of Germany. In October, there will be on the 25th, I think, the conference which is led by Germany by Chancellor on the reconstruction of Ukraine. Therefore, these issues should be addressed. But to support this like a high-level group, I strongly believe we need to have a second level, like a special temporary task force, really like a task force on the level of G7, which could be probably, 15, 20 people, one person from each G7 country, like a Sherpa, maybe one person from IMF, one person from World Bank, one person from EBRD, EIB, few people from European Commission, because clearly they play a leading role, maybe few Ukrainians. I would prefer they to sit in one room, but they can even start doing work virtually, but they should be assigned maybe with 100% of time to support the G7 leaders or G7 plus leaders with ideas how to finance Ukraine. And specifically, they can be assigned with three important tasks. First is to develop these instruments and vehicles, facilities to channel, how to channel funds for Ukraine recovery and reconstruction. I told you, $105 billion is immediate needs. Total estimations of the World Bank around 350. This was done by June, so it does not include the territories which are still uncontrolled and therefore could be not counted. The damage could not be counted there, but clearly it doesn't include the Kharkiv region, which was liberated after that. So probably we will still go to more or less the estimation of $500–600 billion total, damages and reconstruction needs for the war. But where to take this money, how to finance it is a big question. I have a feeling there is nobody yet charged in the world with this task. Everybody says one day in future we will discuss. Many people are focusing on immediate needs, which is very good, but we also need to think about the longer term, financing needs because time matters. So when the war finishes, we need to be everything ready to be ready. So this is a first thing which is needed. Like vehicles, instruments, facilities, but also we need to develop the accountability and transparency framework. How this money will be spent, how reported, in order to avoid low efficiency of spending money, which we have seen in many other cases, Iraq, Afghanistan, you can name maybe more. And maybe other cases like Indonesia, tsunami case could be even serve as a good example, how the money was spent. But the third one is, I think is very important element also is to design and create some kind of implementation engine for Ukrainian authorities, Ukrainian government, and to create the capacity to run the reconstruction projects. This is also very much important because I strongly believe in the Ukrainian ownership of this process, and I hope someone in the world will help Ukraine to do this.
Thank you for that. Well, let's move to the longer term, which you've already begun to discuss a bit. But as the war hopefully ends and Ukraine can focus on the reconstruction of its economy, I'm sure you'll agree it shouldn't just rebuild what it had, but it should modernize its economy, its institutions, and do so, as you've already alluded to, that allows Ukraine to accede to the EU. As you know, I've followed Ukraine and its economic developments for years, going back to the early 90s. And while I've been impressed by the gains on budgetary stabilization and erecting a strong central bank and cleaning up the banking system with your help after the Maidan revolution, it struck me that progress in fighting corruption oligarchs and opening the economy through liberalization measures lagged behind. I also have the sense it's been hard for Ukraine to hold on to some of the gains made on institutional development in the immediate aftermath of the revolution of dignity. And I assume the post-war phase will require not only galvanizing all of Ukraine's society and providing for the return of refugees, but also mobilizing external support, as you've alluded to, through macro assistance, debt relief, private sector efforts. You've already foreshadowed that a major coordination effort is needed. I've written that the G7 is better placed to play this role than the EU. So can you outline your thinking about the longer term, and what do you see the role of the G7, the IMF, the World Bank, the MDBs, the private sector, and others?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. You asking many questions in one, so let's go one by one. First is, I really don't like the word reconstruction or rebuild. I like the word build back better, which is a very, close to the American slogans. But I really think Ukraine needs modernization. We need to modernize, and modernization is not about only rebuilding buildings. It's really like restarting lives for many people, to change something which I name, I don't know if there's a word in English, so like social materia, in Ukrainian environment. And therefore, these several million Ukrainians who went abroad, apparently this is an uncontrolled economic experiment that people are not going for tourism. They will go there maybe for some longer time, and they are integrated in the communities in Europe, in many other countries. They live through the life of people, paying for utilities, going to the police, to the government offices, etc. And I hope they will come not only with the idea that in Ukraine everything works perfectly, but with a more call for change. And this was always a problem for Ukrainian revolution 2004, 2014, but even before, that Ukrainian push for changes was driven by, from 5 to 15% of the most passionate people, and they were defining the vector of development, but the speed of these changes was usually, as a result of maybe 70, 80, 85% of other people who were a little bit more passive, and therefore, since politicians were looking more on the needs of the majorities of people, therefore the changes were not so fast and brave. I think Ukraine now showed a lot about the braveness, braveness to fight. I hope Ukrainians who will come back also will bring the call for the changes and modernization in the country. And this comes with rule of law, this comes with government efficiency, this comes with social relations on the low level, on the horizontal links on the low level. And again, I strongly believe that this is a Ukrainian project for reconstruction. Therefore, the communities themselves who should help themselves building together. It's not only building better, not only modernizing, but they really need to come to the ideas that we have a chance to get rid of the Soviet legacy of the architecture, of urban planning, of the social organization. And this is, I hope we will help the Ukraine with that, with EU support. And the EU vector, as I said, is a dream which is become now close. I think will be another engine which will help Ukrainians to mobilize the internal resources. Still, money is needed, as we discussed in the beginning. And here, the role, if you speak about going from the short term, the midterm to the longer term, I don't believe we can reconstruct the country only with public money, with budgetary money, or even from G7 plus money. The reconstruction of Ukraine, rebuilding and modernization of Ukraine should be done mostly and majority with the private sector money. And therefore, we need to, for sure, for example, the role of IMF here is very simple. We need, with a program, to create a macro framework. We need to bring back the economic policies, fiscal, budgetary, monetary, economic, structural policy back on track. Hopefully, and this should be done even prior to the war finishes. In order to create a base, you cannot invest with a huge inflation. You cannot much invest with a huge devaluation, with a low predictability of the future, with low reserves. Therefore, all of these, the IMF should help, to build this comfort for others. But I don't see the role of the IMF in reconstruction itself, because IMF is not a development bank. Here, the role of the World Bank comes first. World Bank and EIB even more, because EIB is a financial arm of European Union, and therefore they do everything. My understanding, they are working to designing the frame on the priorities, how they can finance Ukraine. World Bank plays also a great role. Now they're trying to consolidate these the money for the multi-donor fund, like they did before, because this is what they did in Haiti, what they did in Indonesia, what they did in Pakistan, and in other cases, in Nepal, in the previous cases. I do hope that the World Bank will not only route others' monies, but also will bring all own money on the table, from their balance sheet, and will finance, the projects, like sewing projects, in some cities, heating systems, water supply, and again, bringing them more already the green technologies, and because this is very much needed. This is a chance. This is a chance to change the Soviet legacy, towards that. EIB is important. EBRD and IFC will be very much important to support the private sector, because again, I don't want Ukraine to come back after the war with a state economy, with a small state economy. We really need to pump in, so to develop the private sector, and the private sector needs money, and maybe even with grants, especially the small and medium business needs also some type of the grants. But in longer term, we need equity, we need the foreign direct investments. And again, this is coming back to the investment climate, this is coming back to the court system, to the rule of law, and not only with public sector money. But I'm sure we will manage it, especially if this will be run as a part of the coordination efforts. If this coordination or the global support of Ukraine will come also with building the capacity in Ukraine of running, as I said, of all these projects, because it will take time. Probably will take, tsunami in Indonesia, I think it was 8 years or 9 years, as it was, they were coming more or less to the situation. And this is not tsunami, this is a real war. But again, I'm confident, I'm positive that we will make it. Also because I see these already, that these 15% of Ukrainians who were driving force in the past, they clearly become 25, 35, 45% now. And this is a big chance, not only for Ukraine, but also for Europe, to have these European people as a part of their family.
Thank you. Obviously, it will never be clear in Ukrainians' minds that they need to dispose of the Soviet legacy as now. I think you make a very important point. The private sector is going to have the critical role to play, but obviously MDBs can help catalyze and jumpstart that process through their financing instruments. So, well, I have one last question to ask you, because our connection is via the IMF. So coming back a little bit more to the immediate and the short to immediate, intermediate, midterm. So as you said, the IMF provided a 1.4 billion rapid financing loan in last April or March, I think. March. There are reports, and you've alluded to it, that the fund is creating a kind of a food emergency window, and that will provide maybe another 50% of your quota, another 1.3, 1.4 billion. But you mentioned also an IMF program. So what's your timeline on that? Is there an official Ukrainian position about the timeline, how that evolution plays out, and how big of a program you would like?
Mark, I have an internal rule not to comment the status of negotiations, but since you also were the executive for the fund, let me say a little bit in a vague way somehow. The first is the war affected not only Ukraine, but also affected many other countries. There are many channels, and I think we will see a lot of these materials in the WEO, in the World Economic Outlook coming soon, and in the World Bank reports. We will see these, analysis coming from different analysts. It's clear that at least the food security is a big problem in the world. The energy security, energy supply, energy prices, inflation, all of these has a lot of inputs from these coming from the Russian invasion. It's very clear, and therefore the fund as an organization, an international organization which is in the center of the global financial stability net or safety net, is clearly thinking about how to support different countries. And we are planning where there will be a board meeting on discussing this new food window for emergency financing, and clearly some countries will be benefited from this, will have to support, especially those who were heavily affected by the food crisis. But also Ukraine will be one of the beneficiaries of this new program. At the same time, as we discussed, Ukraine next year will need much more money. And while I do believe that the majority of this money should come from G7 and hopefully with grants, not with loans, still, as you know, the fund has this kind of catalyst role as an organization which helps to build a macro framework and to ensure or assure some other donors or creditors that their money will not be wasted because of the wrong policies, wrong practices, and the fund will be ready to work or is preparing to play this role early next year. Is in discussion with the authorities. We had a meeting, the call of the president with Kristalina 10 days ago. Yesterday, we had a meeting of the Kristalina with Prime Minister Shmigal during the United Nations General Assembly in New York. We had last week, we had several meetings with the top leadership of Ukraine and other fund in Sarajevo during the IMF constituency meeting. So we are developing now a plan how the fund will play the role next year and as a catalyst for that. I'm sure the role will be there, the fund will be there. The management of the fund assured everyone that the fund will play an important role and the leading role in supporting Ukraine in this unfortunate and illegal war run by Russia.
Well, thank you for that. So we've kept you from doing your job for the last half hour or so. You provided wonderful discussion with us and comprehensive tour d'horizon on the immediate short-term, medium-term, and longer-term needs and requisites of Ukraine. So thank you for joining us today. It's been extraordinarily wonderful, and it's always great to see you, even if virtually. Thank you, Vlad Rashkovan.
Thanks.
All right.